Hello and welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kavatafai. Lucas Papademos, Greece's new Prime Minister. Mario Monti, Italy's new Prime Minister. With the Eurozone debt crisis on life support, it is said the fate of the Eurozone lies in the hands of these two new leaders, fresh in their positions in a week's time. But will changes at the top make any difference in solving their economic problems? Furthermore, how many other replacements are needed to occur in the 21-member Eurozone to solve the debt crisis? In this news analysis, we'll discuss whether new faces will change anything in saving the euro and Europe from crashing.
Anti-austerity protests in Italy and Greece have once again mounted as the new governments in Rome and Athens struggle to save their debt-ridden economies. In Italy, students and unionists poured into the streets of several cities to protest against what they call a banker's government, led by an economist. The protest came as the country's newly appointed Prime Minister, Mario Monti, was about to outline his austerity measures, aimed at restoring confidence in the country's strained public finances. Protesters in Turin, Rome, Palermo and Bari targeted universities, bank branches and tax offices, as Monti's cabinet is mainly made up of bankers and administrators. Clashes were reported between police and demonstrators in Turin as protesters approached the local headquarters of the Bank of Italy. Protesters argue that the new tax hikes and budget cuts would lead to more unemployment and hit the ordinary Italians hardest.
We're not convinced that our governmental change is fundamental. This government is maybe more presentable. Its ministers are more professional than those of former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. These policies are the same for Berlusconi and Monti.
A similar demonstration was staged in Greece, where protesters marched on the U.S. embassy and voiced bitterness against being ruled by bankers on the anniversary of a bloody 1973 student uprising, which helped topple a U.S.-backed military junta. Protesters argue that the radical measures and painful spending cuts demanded by the European Union and the International Monetary Fund in return for a bailout have plunged the country into a fourth year of recession. They believe that further budget cuts planned by the new government, led by Lucas Papademos, would only lead to more job cuts, unemployment and poverty.
We are talking about a government which is based on solutions that have never helped us exit the crisis, nor could help us. Nor could a premier who's a premier of the banks do much to drive us away from the dead end we have reached.
A new report by the EU task force has painted a dire picture of the Greek economy, saying the country has been losing about 60 billion euros in uncollected taxes. A collapse of market confidence has pushed Italy to the brink of financial disaster and driven up its borrowing costs to unsustainable levels. This while confidence in the Spanish economy has also plunged as the country struggles to avoid a bailout. Spain has been selling its bonds at the highest rate since 1997, while demand for the bonds was down compared to a month earlier. As pressure mounts on Eurozone countries to contain their debt, fears among investors are growing over the stability of the entire 17-member Euro bloc. Experts believe another Greece-like bailout or a default by any Euro bloc member could plunge European markets into the red, have a ripple effect on global stocks, and push the economy into yet another recession before it recovers from the first fallout.
Let's find out how bad the Eurozone is doing. Economic commentator, our first guest, Shabir Razvi, joins us from London. From the SIFI Foundation, we have Paolo Raffone, who joins us from Brussels. And Foreign Policy in Focus, Ian Williams, joins us from New York. Thank you all. Paolo Raffone, over to you first. Despite new prime ministers taking over in Italy and Greece, huge protests were held against the austerity measures in these countries. I'm sure you're well aware of that. Are these protests a sign that people in these two specific countries have lost faith and confidence in their governments?
Well, actually, I'm quite encouraged by the fact that people finally are protesting. This means that politics is not dead. And it is very important, because what we have been assisting to is a sort of replacement of politics, debate, parliamentarism with technocratic decisions taken by a group of people behind closed doors in order to save a currency which actually has been imposed on all of us without a real public debate. As you well know, certain countries voted against the Maastricht Treaty that called for this currency, and others saw their parliaments just adopting in a sort of ratification of decisions which were already taken. So now we are assisting to a sort of early uprising. It's still small, but it is meaning that the social society is vital. And this is very important. The matter of who is in the government is now irrelevant, but it's the fact that over the last 10 years we have been assisting to expropriation of national sovereignty and dignity of several countries, with in return now a terrible crisis which has been the result of mishandling of European institutions and their leaders.
Why did you say that who's at top is irrelevant, if I understood you correctly?
Yes, because it is not by replacing a leader that you will change the fate of the situation. The situation has been caused for a number of terrible mistakes which have started from the early beginning with the creation of the euro as it has been created. It was very poorly fought and very poorly implemented. And this was very well known by all governments, including France and Germany. So it is too easy now to say that it's the fault of that or this person in office in that government in that country because there is a problem. The problem is not specific related to a country itself. The problem is a Euro-systemic problem, and this has to be addressed. Until this is not done, this is a joke. It's not serious. And people will uprise, I'm sure, even in France and in Germany.
Shabir Rizvi, what do you think? This has to be addressed, is what Paolo Raffone says. How should it be addressed? What we're seeing are two changes of faces in two of the most badly indebted countries in the Eurozone, Italy and Greece. And of course, with the Eurozone debt crisis spreading wider by the day, does a change in face mean their economic situation is actually going to improve?
Thank you very much. I don't think it's just the issue of Greece and Italy. It's more a structural problem and a system problem. One has to look at what's going on in Euro-wide, whether it's the euro or Deutschmark or French francs if we had in the past, because the whole economic collapse appears to be happening one by one. So just looking at it and targeting that it's a Eurozone problem or a non-Eurozone problem is missing the point. I think because for the last 4 years, since the credit crunch, we've seen a recession, and each issue is compounding what one has to look at, a systemic problem, a problem of the system, which cannot be easily sorted out either by regulation or changing currencies or changing people, as my colleague earlier said, by changing people at the top. I think the academics, the intellectuals, and also civil society, which is now demonstrating in all of the European cities and in America, is to engage the public into understanding that the system needs an overhaul. Without those issues being addressed, I don't think we can move forward as to what's happening in the economy in Europe.
Ian Williams, so what do you think about our guest there saying the system is at fault, generally speaking there, that needs an overhaul? What part of the system? I could name about 5 or 6 points that I've highlighted, which I'll get to if we can.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Look, the two biggest points is that the euro in itself isn't a bad idea, but the way it was implemented, I think Gordon Brown, who was the British Shadow Chancellor and then Prime Minister, refused to join because of the way it was set up, and I think he was quite prescient. I mean, you're marrying different concepts of government. You had a very strong German banking system that didn't believe in supporting the government. And it's all based on the idea that bankers know best. They know better than elected politicians, which is arguable, and they know better than the people. And what they all seem to know is that you should allow free liquidity, funds to slush around the world, and more, as we've seen, that the free markets will determine everything. So the free markets are like lemmings. They panic, and they've been panicking one by one. And we have all of these systemic pressures of derivatives and credit swaps, which sometimes are virtuous because they allow companies and firms to hedge. But other times, it's straightforward gambling. People are shorting the currencies in the hope of making lots of money out of them. And you notice how out of kilter this is. The European economy, the real one where people actually make and buy and sell things, isn't doing so badly. But the financial part of it is catastrophic, and that's because the system is chaotic. The system is designed to make lots of money for some people who don't make anything. They make money. They don't make anything else. In fact, they don't even make the money. They take the money from those of us who have made things. So, yes, there are lots of things wrong with it, and it's very difficult to see how, short of getting back to first principles, we can do much about it. Well,
let's bring up a couple points here. I'm going to go with some of the thoughts that you had there, Ian Williams and Paolo Raffone. In general, the central banks are and I don't know if you agree with me or not, are borrowing and are printing money to buy these distressed assets, as they're called. And then by removing these distressed assets from the marketplace, the central banks are hoping that they can clear away some of the rot in order to stabilize the financial system. But the whole question is, are they going to be able to do so?
With me, I would say
Ian Williams, Paolo Raffone.
I'll
get to you, Ian Williams.
The back of the filing cabinet.
Go ahead, Paolo Raffone.
Central banks are acting differently around the world. There is not the same policy between the American central bank and the European central bank, and then if we go to look around in other parts in Asia, it's even different. So the European one, the ECB, is not lending money to governments, it's lending money to banks, which are its shareholders, which is incredible. So if we want to resolve this problem, we have to restart the economy, because the crisis is given by the two factors of the equation. So if you just go on the austerity plans, you are cutting expenses from the public. But
well, let me jump in here. I'd like to ask you something about the ECB, and I apologize for jumping in. I'd like to find out about the European Central Bank. It is said that they hold sub-AAA assets equal to 14 times its equity. Maybe you could spell out what this means. And large portions of these sub-AAA assets are the very sub-AAA government bonds of Greece, Portugal, Italy, and Ireland. And if these assets in aggregate were to lose 7% of their value, the ECB's equity would be zero.
Well, all this matter of bonds and their AAA, it's a bit forced in, because bonds, especially sovereign bonds, are a very special kind of financial instrument because they're sovereign. So it's the trustability and what you believe it is trustable in that sovereign giving you that paper that makes it tradable. It's not because of rating agencies giving a AAA or a AA. This is not the real issue. I mean, we are making a fuss around this matter, but it is not the real problem. The real problem in Europe is that there are divergent and not convergent policies, both in the economic, in the financial, in the fiscal, and in the geopolitical interests. And so that's why Europe cannot work in this way. And we are coming now to the point where this is quite visible. I do not think this can go on as it is.
Well, let me ask you, Shabir Razvi, do you think it was a mistake for the EU to begin bailing out Greece? Because we've seen how the absolute standards that rendered the euro, how viable that made it. But then we have other countries who are jumping on the bandwagon, so to speak. Italy has announced sweeping reforms in response to the European debt crisis. Borrowing costs for France and Spain have gone sharply higher. And the latest fear is that the Eurozone's second largest economy is getting sucked into the debt maelstrom that have taken the two-year crisis to new level this week. I mean, how imminent is this fear, and what could be the fallout?
Well, I think, look, insofar as the issue of bailing out of Greece is concerned, at the end of the day, Greece had to have that support from Europe, because if it didn't have that support, there was exposure of the other European banks to the Greek sovereign bonds. Therefore, that exposure has exasperated the situation into the banking system. Therefore, whether it's the bailout of Greece or Italy, perhaps Spain, Portugal, Ireland, these will happen because the whole banking system works together and they're exposed to each other. So bailing out is just a short-term issue. As I was telling earlier, that we need to look at the system faults. What are the faults in the system? Whether it was based on something the bankers took too much risk, and the risk that they were not aware of what risk they were taking, and if they took those kind of risk, how can we control those bankers from making the economies totally bust? So those are the issues, not really whether a country is going to be bailed out, not bailed out, or what are the impacts of that bailout. Because if the bailout doesn't happen, then we have a whole host of other problems which will come about. And obviously, as soon as there's a bailout situation, there are austerity measures. And austerity measures lead to social unrest, healthcare being cut, education being reduced, all kinds of impact that the ordinary man in the street feels. And that's why the whole of the discussion that's taking place between civil society and the 1% that is being designated is to really sort out this mess.
Well, let's look at one of the flaws, Ian Williams. I mean, central banks are pretty much outlawing bankruptcy for every large institution and government. And as we saw in the meeting in Brussels of finance ministers, they've decided to pay more to bail out some of these institutions. Isn't this undermining the entire global monetary system?
Because it's so interconnected. As I said before, the free flow of capital, which is one of the shibboleths of modern banker-style economics, allows vast tidal waves of money to flood in and out, speculative money. This was not about bailing out Greece. It was about bailing out the bankers who'd lent the money to Greece and sending the bill to the Greeks. Absolutely. There was no stipulation about the rich Greeks would have to pay taxes in future, which they've avoided doing for years. In fact, there was even no stipulation when they talk about austerity measures about cancelling the major arms purchases the Greeks had made from France and Germany. I believe they're buying 8 frigates, for example. No one mentions that. Austerity means attacking poor people. And so we have this old Washington consensus that caused so much distress in the third world 20 years ago being resurrected and applied in Europe. It's quite clear that cutting back expenditure the way they are doing is going to crash those economies. It's not going to make Greece in a better position to pay its debts. It's a punitive theological measure, and the people who are paying for this, the poorer working people in Greece, aren't the ones who didn't pay their taxes. They're not the ones who have invested in banks, and by the way, they're the ones with their money still stuck in Greece when Greece pulls out of the euro, because I'm fairly sure that most of the affluent people in Greece have already taken their money and deposited it in banks outside Greece in anticipation of Greece coming out of the euro.
Like which banks do you think they've gone to? Which countries?
They will have gone to France and Germany and America and Switzerland. They've gone anywhere out that was going to stay, that wasn't going to be devalued on a huge scale by coming out of the euro. Okay, well, I don't think they've been going to Spain or Italy lately.
Let me ask you, Paul Raffone. This is pretty interesting. Europe is, it's a quote. Europe is in one of its toughest, perhaps the toughest hours since World War II. That was something that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel declared as recent as yesterday. How severe is the situation, and is she, by some accounts, part of the problem currently with her avid support for the euro?
Well, the situation is very, very serious because nowadays we are not after the Second World War, and therefore countries like Germany have regained fully their dignity as a large economy and a large democratic country. And they have their own agenda, both in the economics, in the financial, and moreover in the geopolitical. They do not want to be just a pump for money. So they have their own wish to become a relevant power at regional and international level. And this is what they're pursuing. On the other hand, you have countries which have a wish to become important, like France, and they go around in the Mediterranean, make wars. But in fact, they are losing ground both on the industrial, on the social, and now even in the financial ground. So the thing is that the idea of Europe that wanted all the 27 countries to move together in a convergent way is failing, is not there. And a country like Italy has been simply frozen for the time being. The problem is there. The situation that has become known in the past days was well known 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, so it's nothing new. But it has been frozen because they don't want Italy to be the first to take the move. So we are all waiting on what Germany will do. Germany may decide to quit the Eurozone itself, which is probably a very wise decision, because cannot pay the political price to impose a German way all over the 17 member states of the Eurozone.
And Shabir Rezvi,
I do not see this to be a viable unity.
And Shabir Rezvi, final comments there from you. Same question. How much worse would it get, in essence, for this to get any better based on the current fluid situation that we're seeing?
Well, you're quite right to say it is a fluid situation, and my earnest view at this moment is that the situation is going to get dramatically worse before it gets better. Although that sounds ominous, the positive side of it is that the civil society, the people in different cities coming out on the streets, and as you know, in London, end of this month, there's a big demonstration being organized by the unions, expecting to get large numbers onto the roads. So things like that are really quite positive as to what's coming out of the very difficult situation that each of the nations in Europe are feeling. Just as a side comment, I want to mention and for everyone to understand, Northern Rock Bank in UK, which was bailed out by our government, by the British government here, to the tune of 1.4 billion pounds, is today being sold at half the price to the Virgin Group, to Mr. Branson. So that really shows where the taxpayers' money is going. It's going down the tube completely to support more rich people so that they become even richer.
Okay,
and that, I
let me
think,
get
is
a final thought. Thank you. Let me get a final
one.
thought, since we have a few seconds left, from Ian Williams, in about 30 seconds or less, please.
I think the big one to watch is France. France is very vulnerable. If Italy goes, then the French financial system is going to be rocked to its foundations. And I think clever money will already be shorting on France and their sovereign debts. And that would really imperil the whole European project, which is based upon Franco-German collaboration, at least.
Right, and of course we know their sentiments towards UK and its Prime Minister. We're going to end it there. Thank you. Ian Williams from New York, Foreign Policy in Focus. We had economic commentator Shabir Rezvi prior to Ian Williams from London, and from the SIPI Foundation, Paolo Raffone from Brussels also gave us his comments. And thank you, the viewer, for watching another edition of the Press TV News Analysis. Newsroom at presstv.ir. The old-fashioned way is how you can send us your emails, suggestions, anything you'd like. Do send it to us. From me, Kaveh Tapway, and the entire team, it's goodbye.